Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're going to be looking at the weekly metagame breakdown, the best decks, the metagame guide for the standard best of one format. If you want to learn the best decks in the format, kind of where all the decks kind of rank in terms of what's the best way to get to mythic rank, definitely check out this video. We're going to be covering a whole bunch of deck lists today. Notable things, the ladder just reset. We are now into the September season. Generally, what you'll see is upon ladder reset, there's kind of a shift in terms of the popularity of decks for the first couple of days. People tend to then shift to a little bit more aggressive decks to get to mythic as quick as possible. And then there's a little bit more experimentation towards the middle to end of month. So we're going to cover that with the popularity of the day, and then we'll cover a bunch of different deck lists with the win rates. We'll paste all these deck lists, and you can just copy from your heart's content. We're going to get the data from UntappedGG, what you see on the screen, companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client, aggregates user win rates, gives us a whole bunch of cool stats. If you want to get started with Untapped, link is in the video description down below. Otherwise, like I said, I will paste all these deck lists. Want to say thank you. We broke 14,000 subs this week on the YouTube channel. We're closing in on 15,000, which was the goal. It was towards the end of the summer. We kind of came close, but if you haven't subbed to the channel, it's pretty easy, helps support the content. So we will dive into it. I apologize, my voice is a little raspy. I'm kind of losing my voice, so we are going to muster through today. So notably, with the ladder reset, we're going to look platinum to mythic rank for popularity of the deck. And as mentioned, we see Rakdos Aggro pop up to 17%. This is the kind of mono red aggro splash black. We have Selesnya Rabbits at about 12%, mono red at 8%. So realistically, mono red's about a quarter of your games you can anticipate. Likely, probably I would anticipate a little bit more at the beginning of the ladder reset. We have mono black aggro, Azorius control at 4%. The Azorius control decks are just not winning at a high enough rate. You have 4-color Reanimator, which is a Squirming Emergence deck that will cover that. Orzhov Bats about 4, Boros Mice at about 4. So we kind of look at the trends. We could see the Rakdos deck peak at about 18 and then kind of level off, and then we're seeing it again at its close to high. We are seeing the Rabbits deck pick up. There wasn't really too many in terms of the Lizards decks this week. They've fallen off a little in terms of play rate as well as win rate. So let's dive into it, folks. We are going to look at Diamond to Mythic rank, or sorry, we're going to start with Platinum to Mythic rank because it's the end of the season, and then we're going to shift to Diamond. I got a couple different deck lists from the Diamond queue. The Mythic rank was a little bit concentrated on like some of the top decks, but let's dive into it. Rakdos Aggro is also the highest win rate deck, despite being the most played, most anticipated. It's a very linear aggressive deck, 64%, 110 games played. And this deck here, I'm sure many of you have seen at this point. It is a creature-focused aggro deck that's kind of a prowess theme. So you have things like Cacophony Scamp, as well as Heartfire Hero, both creatures that, when they die, deals damage based on its power to target player. With the Scamp in particular, you can also deal it to permanents. So you're kind of doubling up that damage with Callous Sellsword, which you can then fling. So you deal the fling damage plus the Scamp kind of damage to your opponent. Then you pump up your creatures in a number of ways. Dreadmaw's Ire can give trample, destroy artifacts. Felliness Rage can give haste, as well as give you a body behind if it dies, and gives it +2 power. Bane Splitter gives +2 power. Monstrous Rage effectively gives +3 power the turn you cast it. Blazing Crescendo +3 power. So lots of ways to kind of boost up the power and then fling it at your opponent for lethal. Swiss Spear as a prowess threat. You have Emberheart Challenger as a prowess threat. I always find the split a little odd. I think the Challenger is just a better card in its own right. And then Slick Shot Show Off as kind of your bottom aside, and then just a whole bunch of pump spells, make them hold multiple removal spells in order to try to kill you. From there, new kind of deck. We got the 4-color Reanimator deck. So this deck here is built around about 64%, so close in terms of win rate. It's a Squirming Emergence deck. So Squirming Emergence, 3 mana, return to the battlefield target non-land permanent card in your graveyard with mana value less than or equal to the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So you are a self-milled deck here. You have Founding of the Third Path that could self-mill, Picklock Prankster. You have the Whale of the Forgotten. So this is kind of flexible card. So you can bounce something to your opponent's hand, so it's not bad as a restart. Force a discard, likely won't be played that often. Or look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand, rest into your graveyard. If you have Descend 8, if there are 8 or more permanents in your graveyard, choose 1 or more instead. So then you got some flexibility there. So a whole bunch of ways to put cards in your deck, Philagi, Jace, stuff like that. What you're trying to do is either with Cruelty of Gigs or Squirming Emergence, you can then mass reanimate or like reanimate like a Burma, an Atraxa, one with a multiverse, and just kind of pop off like that. Since you're self-milling so much, Burma could put a whole bunch of lands into play. Like I played against this deck once, and my opponent went Burma, got a whole bunch of lands, had enough lands to cast Atraxa from hand. I kind of just went concede that game real quick. So it's kind of a cool one here. We have an uptick in Boros Convoke this week, 59%. So nothing super innovative. The Convoke deck fell off a little just because they do lose the second one drop that also makes an artifact. So Voldaren Epicure. While this does fulfill the requirement of being an artifact, it doesn't allow you to turn to necessarily the Night Arena Eos Convoke. But just kind of go wide, spam a bunch of creatures, ping them with War Leader's Call. You have Anthem effects with Sanguine Evangelist, as well as Imidane's Recruiter. And in the case of the Great Way Express can be removal, or a bunch of ping effects as well. We then go to Mono Red Aggro. So similar idea. So 58%. This one is using the mouse package. So I will say I'm going to use the word alchemy. I was playing the alchemy version of this deck because there's a alchemy mouse that it's just like a 2/2 that when you cast it, you get a copy of Might of the Meek to hand, so it's just more copies of it. But like the combination of especially curving Heartfire Hero into Manifold Mouse when your opponent doesn't have removal, just giving double strike. This card is Ember Cleave. It's Ember Mouse. So it can push through huge amounts of damage. It triggers the Valiant ability. There's a lot of ways to give trample in this deck, whether it be Monstrous Rage, Demonic Ruckus, or the Manifold Mouse. So you can just push a lot of damage. I usually prefer this version myself compared to the Rakdos version, just because you have like the burn removal between Lightning Strike and Shock, so it can help you play a little bit like into the mirror. You have a little bit more interaction. Whereas with the Rakdos deck, I found it a little bit more like 2 ships going their own ways, right? There's very little kind of interaction. There's a decision if you want to block, but generally blocking doesn't make sense. So it's mostly just kind of who spams faster. I personally like this version better, but it's kind of up to your play style. This one's, I would say, less explosive in a way because you don't have as many pump effects, you don't have as many fling effects, but it's also just a fun deck. Like I think in my version I was -2 Ruckus up to flings, just as another effect, but I don't know. I'm always impartial to Ruckus. It's too much mana at 2 when you're kind of popping off. Ribbity Rabbits. So we got the Rabbit deck. So 57%. This is another deck in Alchemy. They had a new 2-drop that gives a white creature in your hand Offspring. So you just like Offspring your Valley Quest Caller. So for 3 mana, you get 2 of these. The Rabbit deck's really fun. But so all in all, I would say Rabbits is very strong against most decks. It can struggle against the Rakdos decks because you don't have a huge amount of interaction. One thing you can do if you want to hedge the matchup a little bit more, because you are going to be kind of racing in that sense, you could try Elspeth Smite. That was a card I was playing in. I have a video on the Rabbits deck. A couple Elspeth Smites could be pretty reasonable. The Season of Burrow is something you could potentially cut, just go a little bit lower on curve. Pop Patch Recruit makes you multiple bodies, can distribute counters. Season Warren Guard can attack as a 3/2 with tokens. You could get tokens from like Sanguine Evangelist, hop to it, or Warren War Leader. The Valley Might Caller can just get big very quickly. Now, notably, this is a Frog Warrior, so something to keep in mind. With your Cavern, at times, depending on how your hand configures, if you have like some of these 1-drops, they're all warriors while not being rabbits, so it's something you can consider. Like the Valley Quest Caller is a warrior as well. You are a human knight. So you do have like some warriors as a different way to name with the Cavern. Phineas is another way to kind of commit more power to the board without having to overcommit into a sweeper. But all in all, the deck's like pretty explosive when it kind of pops off. It's not as like all in aggro in the sense of like pump spell, pump spell, pump spell. You're committing more to the board in this case here. It doesn't have reach. Knight Errant is the only kind of card advantage of the deck, so keep that in mind. So this one here is a Diamond to Mythic deck. This is Orzhov Discard, Midrange, Pixie-ish. So this is a little bit more of an interactive deck. This is a deck that you could potentially see the Viper be played in. So you have Hopeless Nightmare for discard, Builder's Talent for discard, Tithing Blade as removal, Tiny Bones as discard. The Nurturing Pixie could pick these all up, kind of reset it in that case. Go for the Throat in here. Legion of Ashes is a way to exile target all non-permanent opponent controls and all tokens that player controls with the same name. I do think like just shifting a little bit of the removal a little bit lower, maybe like 3 Bandits talent, maybe 2 Legions, either play more Tithing Blades or some cut downs in there could also be useful while you're attacking your opponent's hand. Format does tend to be a little bit aggressive as we've seen in these earlier decks, but Lilies for hand hate, just a lot of ways to kind of strip your opponent's hands, and then you're just hoping that your top decks are better than your opponent's. Virtue, Life Gain, and another card you could play. Just fair value Vraska, no combo version, just big beaters, and then just kind of overwhelm your opponent with card advantage. Or not card, like just grind value. There's that version, and then there's Orzhov Midrange. So this one is a little bit more of a mid-range control, so not focused too heavily on the discard package. Instead, you know, you have your cut downs. Disfigure is another card where even if like the pump effect gets them out of cut down range, you could still shrink them a little, which is nice. So it could absorb some power. You have bats to eat at their hand. Go for the Throats for removal. Pest control is interesting here, way to kind of sweep these aggressive decks. And if it's not useful, you could just cycle it. Shrouded Shepherd is another kind of sweeper style effect on its own. Gix in here, Legion Ashes, Azorlin, gain you some life. Could rebuy you some of your like bats in this case, Shrouded Shepherd, even your Preachers, Lilies, stuff like that. Abeza in here. You got the Virtue Season kind of top end package with Fountain Port. Golgari Midrange, so this is the combo version, 57%. And this deck here is a combo. If you get Innkeeper's Talent to level 4, you cast Vraska, you can instant ultimate. Your opponent gets 18 poison, they lose. You could instant ultimate Liliana, and then your opponent has to sacrifice half their permanents usually, depending on how you set up those piles. This one's also on a Nissa package, so heavier Planeswalker package in this one. You got Nissas, make big creatures, and then you could overrun your opponent, Ashiok. So comes in, target player exiles X cards, where X is the total mana value of cards you own in exile. So while you could ultimate right away, you're probably not getting like huge amounts of value from it. Fair game plan like Broncos, Deep Cavern Bats, and Mosso Dread Knights, all things you could kind of throw counters on. Shellies, Glissas, and then just a whole bunch of removal scattered in. And then this was a deck from Aka Yeti. They went 49-23 with it. So this is the Niv Supreme domain deck. Elio Drezi was playing a version of this, heavily leveraging things like Keep Harvest and Ancient Cornucopia to fix your mana, gain you some life. You can go, 3 mana into 5 mana. You got Niv Supreme, lets you rebuy cards from your graveyard with like Jumpstart. Roxanne ramps use removal, make your own luck, could cast you multiple spells, draw you stuff. Got some Herd Migrations, tracks on the top end, Leyline Binding that we've seen, Urgent Necropsy, hits a bunch of different things, Ill-Time Explosion as a sweeper, Deadly Cover-Up as a sweeper, Beanstalk to draw you cards, Doppelgang can copy a whole bunch of stuff. In Best of 1, you may not want to Pillage the Bog. It's a little slow. While it can help you set up like against some of these aggressive decks, if I'm a red deck and my opponent's pillaging the bog, plotting it, or like casting it onto, I'm very happy. But maybe like shift that to more Ancient Cornucopias just to adjust like for the Best of 1 meta. But otherwise, like you just kind of overwhelm them with life gain from these effects, Atraxas or like Niv Supremes and stuff like that. So one other deck, I will link it. It didn't really show up in the stats this week, but it is a deck you should be aware on the ladder. Let me see if I can find a variation. So the Boros token control, there's a lot of kind of variations of it. It is a strong deck. That one's like not the highest win rate. Let's see. Caretakers. So it's built around Caretaker's talent. go previous season, 41 and 20. Beautiful. Okay, so this deck here, whole bunch of removal options. You're winning with kind of the combination of Caretaker's Talent and Urbrask's Forge. So this basically draws you a card every turn, gives you a whole bunch of card advantage, stuff like that. This version is basically just all removal, basically. And leveraging like Season of Burrow as a win condition, Urbrask's Forge, Caretaker's Talent. I've played Beza in mine. I don't hate having some access to Beza just because it provides you some life gain, some bodies, and against like the mid-range decks gives you another way to attack. But the combination of Fountain Port, Urbrask's Forge can draw you a whole bunch of cards. So kind of a value engine. You can play even like the creature land in here if you're playing like Fabled Passages, stuff like that. But this one's on a full sweeper package with like the Sunfalls and Temporary Lockdown. So really just kind of playing into these creature decks and saying I'm going to kill everything and you will lose and die. And then just the redundancy, Caretaker's Talent, and the Urbrask's Forge. Also, a Smite's a card you can play at times. I've played that. The Abrades help in the kind of mirror matchups to hit the Urbrask's Forge. Then you have the Get Lost for the Caretaker's Talent mixed into there. I think, like, even just looking at this list, I would maybe trim an Abrade, trim a Brotherhood's End, play 2 Bezas, and then cut, like, the Fabled Passages, play 1 more Elegant Parlor, and then maybe, like, Restless Biovac is a card you can play instead. Just giving you, like, another effect. Desolation Field's another card you can look at in those mixes there, but this gives you kind of an idea of the Boros deck itself. And you can see they have like pretty positive win rate against the creature decks. This deck destroys the like discard decks. It's really good against the Rabbits decks too, but you're losing against like control, and it's pretty bad into like the Squirming Emergence combo deck stuff. So that's it for the week. Let me know what you think, what you've been playing, what you've been enjoying, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.